Welcome to One Tired Teacher, episode 96, Halloween and Makerspace. Ooh, so can you believe that we're already talking about Halloween? Does that even feel possible? And of the time of this recording, I'm still at the end of September, but I'm getting ready to decorate my house today because I love to decorate for all of the holidays and all the seasons, and it's really exciting, and I can't wait to transform the house into a house of Halloween. I never do anything scary. Like mine is like cute Halloween more than it is scary. It's definitely not scary. And I think it's fun. And even my kids that have gotten so much older, they're 16 and 20, they still love when I do that. And I think it's always going to be a part of my yearly traditions. And so I thought in that same sense, then I really wanted to talk about Halloween and Makerspace and what that might look like in a classroom or media center. Hope you stick around.
Welcome to One Tired Teacher. And even though she may need a nap, this teacher is ready to wake up and speak her truth about the trials and treasures of teaching. Here she is, wide awake. Wait, she's not asleep right now, is she? She is awake, right? Okay. From Trina Debery Teaching and Learning, your host, Trina Debery.
Hey, so today I want to talk some more about Makerspace and Halloween and all those kinds of things because, we're really getting into the full swing of school. And even though we've got lots of challenges this year with social distancing and masks and no shared materials and things like that, I still think it's vital. And it's so important that we still create these opportunities for kids to do hands-on activities. And it's, sad that we can't do a lot more cooperative type of learning. And I think that we try to do that. We can still try to do that with things online like Google Docs. And I think that can be really, really powerful when we're working through parts of a challenge, and we can still use that kind of technology in order to continue it to be, to allow it being collaboratively. Or I have seen this also in classrooms, and I think this is really smart. I know that some teachers will use tape, and they will tape around the 4 desks, which is, a very large area of the room because they're 6 feet apart. And so we've got 4 desks and 6 feet, which also has tape around it, but they've got like a traffic lane in their classroom. It's really, I think it still makes it feel like you're in a group. And so you can turn to your partner, and you might have to speak loudly, and you might have a lot of noise in your classroom, but you're still giving them an opportunity to talk to another person. Or you might even, for older kids, you might even utilize your whiteboards and allow them to write some things down and share them with their partner, that way, like through like a showdown or something like that, so that we can still utilize that highly effective, high engagement, cooperative learning style of teaching. So, having said that, I have created some Makerspace moments in literature all around Halloween titles, and they've been out for a while. I'll link to them in the show notes if you're interested. I'm about ready to create digital versions so that you can use these in a virtual classroom, as well as making some parts of this so that they could work on the document collaboratively, because it will be on Google Slides, and you'll be able to share part of the activity, maybe even the planning part, or the asking questions part, and you can have kids like working on the same document, which I think could be really fun. And even though my Makerspace activities are geared for the younger grades, really 2nd grade, 1st grade, I think that it's still possible for them to put some kind of input or some kind of writing into a document. Whether you can completely understand it or not, that's okay, because we've got to start with our stages of writing, and that's important. So I keep that in mind. But anyway, so they're not totally transferred over to a digital version yet, but I am working on that this week and next week, so they should be available soon. If I can't get it done this week and next week, then I'm thinking it's not going to happen. But that is the goal, because I really think it's important for you to have an option, a digital option. And it also saves on paper, so that's helpful. Anyway, so this is the thing about Halloween, and now in some places you can't celebrate Halloween. Like, you can't do any activities around Halloween. So I did pick one of the titles that I picked for the month, because I like to pick, I like to pick about 4 books, because I think we can get some really good stuff going in 4 weeks leading up to Halloween. And since Halloween is on a Saturday this year, which makes it awesome, then we have a little bit of time, so we can use 1, 2, 3, 4. So we definitely can use 4 weeks of plans. So in a makerspace for Halloween, one of the titles that I picked is called, oh, I lost it. I Need My Monster. I Need My Monster by Amanda Knoll, and she has written this adorable story. It doesn't actually have anything to do with Halloween, but I thought it was a good one to include, because that way you could use it even if you had kids that don't celebrate Halloween, or like you're not allowed to celebrate Halloween or something, because it does have like a monster theme, but it's not a monster. It doesn't have anything to do with Halloween. It has to do with a little boy named Ethan, which you determine this little boy because you are paying very close attention to the details in the illustrations. In the illustration, we see that it says Ethan's room at the very beginning of the story in the picture. It never calls him Ethan in the story. So this is a really good focus on illustrations and how they make meaning in text. So we can focus on that in this story. Plus, it has excellent illustrations. It's illustrated by Howard McWillem. He did a really, really good job bringing the story to life and helping create elements of the story that help us understand it. So it's really great for that standard. So anyway, and so you find out that there's this boy named Ethan, and Ethan is looking for his monster. His monster has gone missing, and he just is like, where could he possibly be? And he kind of has some substitute monsters that come in to do the job, and that's not okay with him. Like, he's not happy with any of these substitute monsters. He's like, well, this is not the same as my monster Gabe, so it's just not going to work out. And so he goes through this whole thing of not like having his monster, and he wants his monster, and I'm not going to give away the end, but it's so cute, and it's such a sweet story, and it's fun, and I think kids can relate to the fact that sometimes they feel like they have monsters under their bed, and in this case, that's where Gabe's monster lives, is under the bed. But it makes it fun. It's not scary. It makes it like a fun play on something, and you can talk about things that are real and what's not real, and fantasy versus things that are real, reality versus reality. And so I think that part can be really interesting. But it's just a very cute story, and it's fun to do in the month of October. And so what happens in this case is I do a couple of close reading activities with the story, and that's what I like to do during the month of October. I focus on whatever standards are supposed to be covered during this time. And so in my district, what we're supposed to be focusing on right now we're asking and answering questions. And I think getting kids to formulate questions can be very difficult, especially if you're talking about younger students. So I think this makes a really good practice for formulating questions, because they have some natural questions that come up. And I don't think sometimes they even realize they're asking the question. So we really want them asking questions. That's why I love to tie Makerspace into literature, because we're going through that engineering design model where they're asking questions, and we want them to ask questions about the problem and about possible solutions, and we want them to use that kind of inquiry-based learning to better understand how they can create a model to solve, like that would be a replicate of a solution, or it may be a model of a already existing solution that they have revised and refined to make it better. And we know that that's touching on our engineering standards. So we're covering engineering standards through Makerspace, and we're also covering literature standards through our close reading activities. And that's how I feel like I can justify this to admin who are often, wanting to know, what is it, standards based? What is your objective? What's your essential question? And all those fun things that they're asking for. Well, we have those things. It is standards based, and we do have literature standards involved. And so, how do readers ask and answer questions? We can even say, how do engineers ask and answer questions? How do makers ask and answer questions? That's one of the standards that we're covering. We are covering in these makerspace activities for Halloween. I cover that standard. Also cover the standard of characters. Like we can look at story elements in these particular books, especially in this book, and with a real focus on the characters and how they are overcoming the obstacle. How Ethan is overcoming the obstacle of having not having his monster there for him. And we might even look at Gabe and Gabe's perspective, because it does introduce Gabe, and we do get to hear some reasons why Gabe was missing. And so we get to hear Gabe's version and Gabe's, side of the story, which I think could also be another powerful standard that you could include, would, be point of view. I don't include that in this story because usually we're maybe touching on that, but we haven't quite really dove into that standard yet. But it would be a really good one for this story, especially because it really is two different perspectives. We don't hear from Gabe a lot in the story, but we do enough that you could do some work on that standard. So anyway, and then also we're focusing on vocabulary. Always have a vocabulary component, because I think that it's so powerful to use words that you get in stories to teach, some of those higher level words that students often don't know what they mean, but when you're reading them in context, they have a much better understanding, and it's just a prime time to teach them some of those new words. So I think that that's really good. I also focus on story structure, because I think that it's a very the way that Amanda has written this story, with a clear beginning and introducing the problem and how she flows right into what is happening, and then how she concludes it at the end, which is actually the second grade standard, where you're taking a closer look at the beginning of the story and how it sets up the structure of the story, and then looking at the end and how it concludes it and wraps it up. But when we're looking at the first grade standard, we're looking at how we can tell if this is fiction or if we can tell that this is nonfiction, and that would be a perfect opportunity to discuss that, especially in a story like this where kids can completely relate. And then it lends itself to talking about realistic fiction. There's just so many standards that you could cover in this book. So I give you lots and lots of choices. And I like to look at a story and think, what's the most powerful standard that jumps out in my mind. And you can go in reverse, where you can, you have the standards that you're going to work, and then you're finding a story that will work well with that standard. And in this case, there's multiple standards that you could cover in this story. So you're doing some close reading work. You might do that throughout a week. And then at the end of the week, your conclusion could be a makerspace activity. And I love Makerspace. I think it's so vital to have makerspaces in classrooms or in a common area, like a media center. And if you're going, I don't know what a makerspace is, are you ever going to get to that part? And I'm going to say, I'll tell you, it can be an area. It doesn't have to be an area, though, because it doesn't have to be limited by the space. You could do a makerspace box, and it could be materials inside of a box that you get out and you allow students to use. That would be when you could use shared materials. In this case, you might have separate boxes or containers or bags or paper bags with specific materials inside of it that you could pass out and allow students to create their solutions at their seat. But anyway, so a makerspace is often an area in a classroom, can be in a media center, where kids are exploring and tinkering, making, creating. It's just such a place for them to think and inquire and problem solve and think critically and productively fail, and revise and build persistence. And just so many amazing things can happen inside of a makerspace. And I love that. One of my favorite definitions of a makerspace, or talking about Makerspace comes from the Makerspace playbook. And it says Makerspaces come in all shapes and sizes, but they all serve as a gathering point for tools, projects, mentors, and experience. A collection of tools does not define a makerspace. Rather, we define it by what it enables, making. Such an incredible look at what makerspace is. So, sorry about that little ding. I didn't put my computer on Do Not Disturb, but now it is, so it won't happen again. All right, so that's one thing that you can do. So at the end, so now you know what a makerspace is. And again, if you don't have the space because your desks are 6 feet apart and all of your furniture's out and you had to get rid of your classroom library, which God forbid, I hope that didn't happen. Or you have a space in your media center. I have a space in my media center. That is always a good place to come as a class, and you can still socially distance. And if you have individual bags of materials for students to use, and in this case, I have them creating a monster. Now, I usually like to keep my makerspace activities a little bit more STEM aligned with a specific focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. But in this case, it's kind of loosely designed. I feel like we're really focusing on the engineering standard, because we are working through the engineering design model. I do have them going through the process of asking questions and planning, creating. I have them, building a solution, and then they're revising and they're analyzing it, how did it go? And they're really working through that type of design thinking, design creation thinking. But in this case, it's not as open-ended, because they're coming up with a solution for Ethan. And if you put it that way, if you allowed it to be more of Ethan has a problem, his monster has gone missing. How are we going to solve Ethan's problem? That way, it could really be open-ended, and it could be anything. They might come up with, a stuffed animal that Ethan has to have instead of the monster. They might come up with a radio where they're going to play different sounds that help him soothe him to sleep, and instead of him needing his monster. They might come up with, who knows? They could come up with a variety of different solutions in that case. So you could leave it open-ended. Or you could have them creating a monster in replacement of Gabe, and that allows them to solve Ethan's problem in that way. But that's a little bit more narrow. And again, I normally like to have it pretty open-ended, but in this case, I didn't. I did have them create a monster. I wanted them to, I gave them a multitude of materials. It doesn't have to be anything crazy or expensive. I allowed them to have some cardboard and pipe cleaners, popsicle sticks. Play-Doh makes really good materials in this particular makerspace activity. And what else did we use? Oh, you could do Legos or some kind of blocks or something like that. They could create their monster out of those materials. So even if you had, recyclable things, paper towel rolls or toilet paper rolls, any of those kinds of things that are easy to collect and organize into individual baggies for students. So I think that would be really helpful. You definitely want them to go through the stages. You want them to plan. You want them to work through those things. And in some cases, you can do that. You could do that where they talk across the room to each other, or you put that, you used a digital version and you had them working collaboratively on one document, which you could do through Google Slides. If you shared the link with, the same 4 kids and they were all working on that particular document, they could see each other typing. I think that's so cool when that happens. I love that aspect of Google, and that's how they intended it to be used, as a collaborative resource. And so I think that's really powerful. And then, or you could have them working on their own independent slides as well. So that that would be up to you. So that's one of the activities that you could do for Halloween, using a book that doesn't specifically have to do with Halloween, but it kind of loosely relates. So I Need My Monster, a very cute story. I suggest, and I haven't even had a chance to do this yet, but that's my next goal too, is to create Hey, That's My Monster, which is a second book written by Amanda Knoll and also illustrated by Howard McWillem. And in this case, Ethan has a little sister and they're kind of fighting about about their monster. So I think that one would be a really fun one to do, a compare and contrast. And, what was the same about the story? What was different about the story? And I think that that's really powerful. So that would be an option that you could use. And again, you're staying away from specifically Halloween. But let's talk about a few that we could do that were tied more to Halloween. And before I'll go any further, I do want to tell you that you could make this as open-ended as you want to. You could use completely different books. I'm just giving you a few suggestions. I'm going to link to them in the show notes. It'll take you to them on Amazon, and they are my affiliate link, which means I make like pennies on the dollar when you purchase that book through that link. And which, doesn't hurt you. It doesn't change the price for you. It just helps me, again, like just a few pennies. So if you are interested in those, I'll link to those in the show notes, and you can, find them on Amazon. And I also will link to my Makerspace Moments in Literature Halloween bundle, so you can have access to the materials to work through the process and also through the close reading activities. And I have gone over some variety of standards. I'll tell you what they are. Like I said, asking and answering questions, vocabulary. We do some retelling in one of the stories. We look at characters and how they respond to events. We look at story elements. We look at story structure. And then we work through the engineering design model. And it's very standards based. So you have all the evidence you need for that aspect. And again, you could pick any story. You could do this with any book, and then you could create like a close reading, sequence of activities, and then your cumulative project at the end could be a makerspace creation. Like they could create a solution to the problem in the story. So another one that I did that I think is fun. I think this one is also a little bit older. It's called Something Pumpkin. Actually, I take that back. Something Pumpkin, and it is I believe a rhyming book. I have to look back. Yes, it is a rhyming book. So this would be something fun you could do for like a phonemic awareness activity. And I was reading to a kindergarten class this past week, and I was going to do a rhyming activity with Llama Llama. And one activity that I think is really powerful for phonemic awareness, one of the things is actually getting kids to like really listen to the sequence of words. And so they're listening and paying attention. And so you read it incorrectly and you have the kids say, no, like that's not correct. You want them to hear that for example, if I was reading this sentence, to keep bravely afloat while crossing a moat. If I said to bravely keep while crossing, I guess that one's a little trickier, isn't it? Yeah, that one's tricky. Okay, I would not switch around the words in this rhyming book because it's really hard for them to follow as far as a rhyming book goes. So let me give you a different example because I don't want to mess you up. This one's from A Skeleton for Dinner. And so if I said, Big Witch took a taste. This is so yummy, she said. So if I read it again and I say, Big took witch taste a, this is so... And that's when I would want them to go, no, because they would hear that doesn't sound right. The words are not in the right order. And so then I would go, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. And I would try it again. Big Witch took a taste. And then they'd give me a thumbs up for yes. And then I could keep going. And I would just do this periodically in the book for them to hear that the words were out of order. So that don't do it in a rhyming book. Do it in a book that doesn't rhyme because that makes it a little bit more tricky. But with the rhyming book, another phonemic awareness activity that you could do is you could start off reading one of the first parts of the rhyming sequence in the sentence, like harvest time for a scarecrow is especially pleasing. A fresh crop means all new heads for the, and then they'd have to think of words that rhyme with pleasin'. And so this is a little more difficult. So this might be second grade, but sometimes we have those second graders that are really lacking in that phonemic awareness aspect because they're like struggling to rhyme, and rhyming is a foundational phonemic awareness activity they should be able to do. When we have kids that are struggling in reading, sometimes and a lot of times the problem is that they lack phonemic awareness. So having them like come up with a rhyming word at the end can make it fun and also have them practice rhyming. And especially when they have to rhyme like these kind of bigger words, that's pretty tricky. So if they can do that, then you know that they've mastered rhyming and you can, move along. But that's just something you could do. So that's with Something Pumpkin. And in this case, we do, a couple of different close reading activities that you can choose from. And then the Makerspace activity is they are using those pumpkin candies to build different things. So they might use the pumpkins to build a bridge, and they might use the pumpkins to build a ladder. This is a very open-ended challenge. And so you might give them a time frame. You might give them specific tools. They have to build something with the pumpkins and toothpicks, or the pumpkins and popsicle sticks, or the pumpkins and index cards. That could work too. And you don't want to get stale pumpkins though. You want to make sure your pumpkins are fresh, because if they're stale and crumbly, then they don't work as well. They're a little bit more malleable if they're fresh pumpkins. So keep that in mind. That's just one option. So that's from Something Pumpkin, and that is by Scott Allen, with the illustrations by Jimmy Pickering. So I'll link to that in the show notes, as well as the something. Actually, I'm going to link to the Makerspace bundle, and then you can see all the individual Makerspaces if you're interested in that. And then Skeleton for Dinner. I love this one because it plays on words. Like when you read that title, and this is a really good one to do with like even predicting, like, making a prediction of what you think this story is going to be about. And again, using the illustrations to help you determine what it's about, because it's very detailed in the illustrations. It has two witches in the background, brewing something underneath a tree, and then Skeleton's face looks like oh no, and so then they're like, oh my goodness, they're gonna have skeleton for dinner, they're gonna eat skeleton. And so they can make these predictions about eating skeleton when in reality they want to invite skeleton to dinner. So it's a really fun one to like you have a prediction and then like readjust your predictions throughout the story. So I think that's a powerful thing that you can do with this book. And then there's a multitude of like how skeleton overcomes the obstacle, and what skeleton's problem is that they've misunderstood. How would you solve that? You could do a very open-ended creation in that case. I was a little bit more stringent on having them create a skeleton, and that's when they were using Q-tips. And this is one that you could do as far as individual materials. They wouldn't have to work on it together, and they can put the pieces of the Q-tips together to make a skeleton, which is a little bit more crafty than it is Makerspace, because it's not very open-ended. They do go through the engineering design process. If you wanted it to be very open-ended, instead of giving them the challenge of creating the skeleton, you could have them, solve skeletons problem, and that is that they've misunderstood. What could they do to help a skeleton not misunderstand? So that would be really interesting to see what they would come up with. They can come up with things that are so creative, and that's what we want kids to do. We want them to have that creative ability. And we want them to get stuck too. We want them to not think, I don't know what skeleton could do. I don't know what to make. I don't know what to create. Productive struggle is so important, because that's where we have a chance to teach kids resilience, and that's an essential skill and a life skill, and we're not doing enough of that with our standardized everything, and everything's the same and all that kind of stuff. Like, we're not showing kids that it's okay to fail. We're not putting them in situations where they learn from failure, and having that growth mindset is so important, and it will really benefit them in life. So that's another fun one to do, Skeleton for Dinner. And then the final one that I look at, which is definitely primary, for sure, more kindergarten, first grade. This is The House That Monster Built, and where it's almost like this is the house that Jack built. So it's like builds on that, and it has all these different characters that are trying to help with the house, and it's kind of a mess, and you're doing a lot of repeated reading, and the kids can help you with that, and that makes it a little bit more fun. And then this is a little harder. You're doing more of those reading foundational skills than you are as far as like a story structure. We do have characters, but there's so many characters to keep up with, and we do have a setting, so they could definitely talk about story elements, and in that case, and they can use illustrations, making meaning of the text. That's another really good one for this book. And then what they do is you give them a challenge of solving Monster's problem, which is he wants this house, and maybe they would come up with Monster House if you're going to leave it open-ended, or maybe you would just, it again would be a little bit more specific with their designing and creating a house for Monster. And then you could use popsicle sticks, you could use Play-Doh again, you could use Legos, you could use cardboard and materials that you have on hand or that are easy and cheap to gather, and allowing them to use them, individually. I think that's important as well right now, unfortunately. And so those are the 4, and I actually included an extra one. Those are some books that you can use during this Halloween season, and I think it's fun to build up to that. And there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of work that can be done with standards, and a lot of work that can be done in the engineering design process, and really creative thinking and letting them solve these problems. Making it more open-ended is definitely a direction you can take, and that I would highly recommend. If you want it to be a little bit more craft-like, then you would have, you would give them a specific thing that they have to do, like they're creating a skeleton or they're creating a monster house. And in that case, and in order to make it a little bit more open-ended and have some choice, allow for choice, that would be providing different materials and letting them choose how they're going to construct it, what it's going to look like. So I hope that gets you through the month of October. And if you are feeling like you need a little bit of help with the planning sheets and the close reading responses, then check out that bundle on TPT. It's the Makerspace Moments in Literature Halloween bundle. And if you're feeling like, nope, I got enough information, I can totally wing this on my own, then good luck to you. And I hope that this is like a super fun month of learning and creating for you. Until next time, this one tired teacher is feeling a little spooky. Sweet dreams and sleep tight.